The village of Ndlovu sat quietly beneath the dark African sky, hidden between endless fields and a massive forest that stretched farther than anyone could see. During the day, the village felt warm and alive. Children ran through dusty paths, women cooked over open fires, and farmers returned home carrying baskets of maize on their backs. But when night came, everything changed. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, doors closed tightly. Fires were put out early. Parents pulled their children inside and warned them never to look toward the forest after dark. The forest was feared by everyone. For generations, old stories had passed from one family to another like dangerous secrets. People whispered about strange voices that cried in the night. Hunters spoke of shadows moving between the trees. Some claimed the forest was cursed by restless spirits. Others believed the souls of missing villagers still wandered inside, unable to find peace. Years ago, several people had entered the forest and never returned. No one spoke about those disappearances for very long. In Ndlovu, silence was safer than questions. That night, heavy clouds covered the moon. Wind rushed through the village like invisible hands shaking the roofs of mud houses. Thunder rolled across the sky while rain began falling hard against the dry earth. Inside his small hut, Kofi sat beside a weak fire, staring at the storm outside. Sleep would not come to him. Something about the night felt wrong. Then, suddenly, a scream exploded from the forest. It was so loud and painful that Kofi jumped to his feet. The scream echoed through the darkness again. Not the cry of an animal. Not the sound of wind. It was human. Full of terror. Full of suffering. The entire village woke at once. Dogs barked wildly and pulled against their ropes. Babies cried inside frightened mothers' arms. Men grabbed spears with shaking hands while elders whispered prayers under their breath. Another scream rose from the forest. Long. Broken. Desperate. Women covered their mouths in fear. It has returned, one old man whispered from inside his hut. The spirits are angry, another voice answered. The panic spread quickly from house to house. No one dared step outside for long. Even the bravest hunters stayed near their doors, staring toward the black wall of trees surrounding the village. Kofi's heart pounded hard in his chest. Because beneath the fear, beneath the storm, he recognized the voice. A cold feeling spread through his body. No, he whispered to himself. It could not be possible. That voice belonged to someone who disappeared years ago. Someone he had tried very hard to forget. Another scream tore through the night. This time it sounded weaker. Painful. Almost begging for help. Kofi closed his eyes tightly as memories rushed back into his mind. A young woman laughing beside the river. Warm sunlight on her face. Tears falling from her eyes the last time he saw her. Amma. Outside, villagers gathered near the center of the village despite the chief's warnings. Fear had already taken hold of everyone. The village chief, an old man named Jabri, raised his staff with trembling hands. No one enters the forest, he shouted over the storm. Everyone stays inside until sunrise. Lightning flashed across the sky, lighting the forest for one terrifying second. And in that brief moment, some villagers swore they saw a figure standing between the trees, watching them. Then darkness swallowed everything again. The screams suddenly stopped, but the silence that followed felt even worse. Morning finally came to Ndlovu, but the fear from the night before still hung over the village like smoke after a fire. The rain had stopped, yet dark clouds remained above the forest. Villagers gathered in small groups near their homes, speaking in nervous whispers. No one laughed. No children played in the dusty roads. Even the animals seemed uneasy. Kofi walked slowly through the village with tired eyes. He had not slept at all. The screams still echoed inside his mind. And so did the voice. Amma. Every step he took pulled him deeper into memories he had spent years trying to bury. Long ago, before fear poisoned the village, the forest had been the heart of Ndlovu. The people depended on it for everything. Men hunted there every morning. Women gathered fruit, herbs, and firewood beneath the giant trees. Children played near the river that flowed through the edge of the forest. Back then, the forest was not feared. It was respected. Loved. Kofi remembered those days clearly because Amma had always been beside him. As children, they spent hours exploring narrow paths between the trees. Amma was fearless. While others obeyed every superstition, she laughed at old stories about spirits and curses. She believed the forest was alive, not evil. Kofi could still picture her bright smile as she raced him toward the riverbank, her laughter echoing through the trees like music. But everything changed the year the disappearances began. First, an old hunter failed to return home. Then 2 young brothers vanished while collecting wood. Weeks later, another woman disappeared near the river. Fear spread through Ndlovu like sickness. The villagers stopped entering the forest after sunset. Soon, even daylight visits became rare. Every strange sound became a warning. Every shadow became a sign of evil. Then came the drought. The crops began dying under the hot sun. Children grew weak from hunger. Sickness spread from hut to hut. Families prayed desperately for relief, but nothing changed. The village needed someone to blame. And somehow, they chose Amma. Some said she angered the spirits because she mocked the old traditions. Others whispered that bad luck followed her family. A few jealous villagers claimed they had seen her wandering deep inside the forest alone at night. Rumors quickly became truth in frightened minds. Kofi remembered the terrible meeting in the village square as if it had happened yesterday. Villagers surrounded Amma while angry voices rose from every direction. She brought the curse. She angered the forest spirits. She is the reason our children are starving. Amma stood in the center of the crowd, shaking but trying not to cry. Her mother held her arm tightly, begging the villagers to stop. Kofi had been there too, watching, silent. That memory still filled him with shame. He had wanted to speak. He had wanted to defend her. Deep inside, he knew the accusations were cruel and unfair. But fear controlled him. If he defended Amma, the village might turn against him too. So he lowered his eyes and said nothing. That silence became the greatest regret of his life. The crowd grew louder. Someone threw dirt at Amma. Another person spat near her feet. The village chief demanded she confess to bringing evil upon Ndlovu. But Amma refused. Tears rolled down her face as she looked around at the people she had known her entire life. Then her eyes found Kofi. That moment never left him. She did not look angry. That was the worst part. She looked heartbroken, as if the silence from the person she trusted most had hurt her more than the crowd itself. Without another word, Amma broke free from the crowd and ran toward the forest. Her mother screamed her name and tried to follow, but villagers held the old woman back. Kofi almost ran after Amma. Almost. But fear rooted his feet to the ground. And within seconds, Amma disappeared into the trees. No one saw her again. A few days later, her mother died from grief and sickness. Some said her heart simply gave up. After that, the village buried the story in silence. People pretended Amma had never existed. The forest became forbidden land. Parents used her story to frighten children into obedience. Elders warned that spirits punished anyone who entered too deeply into the trees. And slowly, fear became part of village life. But Kofi never forgot. Every time he passed the edge of the forest, guilt followed him like a shadow. Some nights he dreamed of Amma calling his name from the darkness while he stood frozen, unable to move. Now, after all these years, the screams had returned. And deep inside his heart, Kofi feared the truth. Maybe the forest had not buried the past after all. Maybe it had finally come back. The sun rose slowly over Ndlovu, but its light brought little comfort. A cold silence covered the village. Smoke from cooking fires rose into the air, yet no one spoke loudly. People moved carefully, nervously glancing toward the forest as if something terrible still watched them from inside the trees. Near the center of the village, frightened families gathered beneath the old baobab tree where village meetings were held. The screams from the night before had shaken everyone. Fear had entered every home. Kofi stood near the back of the crowd, listening quietly as villagers argued with one another. "We must offer a sacrifice to calm the spirits," one elder said with a trembling voice. "The forest is angry again." Several people nodded quickly. "Yes," another man agreed. "This is punishment." We ignored the warnings. But not everyone believed the same thing. A younger hunter stepped forward angrily. "Spirits do not leave footprints," he said. "Someone is inside that forest." Murmurs spread through the crowd. The hunter pointed toward the edge of the village where several men had made a disturbing discovery earlier that morning. Huge footprints pressed deep into the muddy ground near the trees. Not animal tracks. Human. Bare feet. And beside them hung a piece of torn cloth caught on a low branch, moving gently in the morning wind. Women covered their mouths when they saw it. Then came the worst discovery of all. Fresh blood had been found near the river. The news spread through Ndlovu like fire through dry grass. Panic grew stronger with every whispered rumor. Some villagers claimed the blood belonged to a spirit hunting at night. Others believed someone from the village had been attacked deep in the forest. Children clung tightly to their mothers while old men muttered prayers under their breath. The village chief, Jabri, raised his staff for silence. "No one enters the forest," he ordered firmly. "We will not awaken whatever lives there." "But what if someone needs help?" the hunter argued. Jabri's face darkened. "Anyone who enters those trees may never return." The crowd fell silent. Everyone remembered the disappearances from years ago. Everyone remembered Amma. Kofi lowered his eyes as guilt twisted inside him again. All morning, he tried to convince himself the voice from the night before could not belong to her. It was impossible. No one could survive alone in that forest for so many years. And yet, the screams sounded so real, so human, so familiar. As the meeting ended, small groups formed around the village. Fear turned people suspicious. Some accused neighbors of angering the spirits. Others whispered that the curse had returned because old sins had never been forgiven. Near one of the huts, several children spoke quietly among themselves. Kofi overheard them as he passed. "We saw her," one little girl whispered fearfully. "A woman near the trees before sunrise." "She was just standing there," another child said, "watching the village." Kofi stopped walking. His heart pounded hard. "What did she look like?" he asked carefully. The children stared at him nervously. "She wore torn clothes," the little girl answered softly, "and her face looked sad." Before Kofi could ask more, the children ran off toward their homes. A heavy feeling settled over him. For the first time, he allowed himself to think the impossible. Maybe Amma was alive. Maybe she had survived all these years while the village believed she was dead, or cursed. But if that was true, then the village had done something unforgivable. As Kofi walked alone near the edge of the village, he noticed an elderly blind woman sitting outside her hut. Her name was Nia, and many believed she understood things others could not. Without turning her head, she suddenly spoke. "You hear the past calling you." Kofi froze. Nia slowly lifted her face toward the wind blowing from the forest. "The forest only returns what the village tried to bury," she whispered. A chill ran through Kofi's body. Before he could answer, the old woman closed her eyes again, as if the conversation had already ended. The rest of the day passed under a cloud of fear. No one went near the forest. Doors were shut before sunset. Fires burned brighter than usual as families prayed for protection. Then night came again. The wind returned first. Then silence. And suddenly, a scream shattered the darkness. Closer this time. Louder. More desperate. The entire village froze in terror. Another scream followed, echoing through the night air. But this time, the villagers heard something clearly beneath the crying. A woman's voice, calling for help. The screams did not stop until nearly sunrise. No one in Ndlovu slept that night. Families stayed hidden inside their huts while fear moved through the village like a living thing. Some people prayed. Others cried quietly in the darkness. A few men stood guard with spears in trembling hands, though none dared step close to the forest. But as the first light of morning touched the sky, Kofi made his decision. He could no longer ignore the voice calling from the trees. Whether it was Amma or not, someone was suffering inside that forest. And deep inside his heart, guilt pushed him forward stronger than fear. Before the village woke fully, Kofi quietly packed a small bag with water, dried food, and a hunting knife. He avoided the center of the village so the elders would not see him leave. As he reached the edge of the forest, he stopped. The trees stood tall and dark before him like silent guards protecting terrible secrets. For a moment, fear wrapped around his chest. He remembered all the stories told since childhood. Spirits, curses, missing villagers who never returned. Then he heard the faint echo of a woman crying somewhere deep inside the forest. Kofi took a slow breath and stepped forward. The moment he entered beneath the trees, the world changed. The air felt colder, heavier. The sounds of village life disappeared behind him completely. No birds sang above the branches. No insects buzzed nearby. Only silence. An unnatural silence that made Kofi's skin crawl. Dry leaves cracked softly beneath his feet as he walked deeper between the giant trees. Sunlight barely reached the ground through the thick branches overhead. After several minutes, Kofi noticed strange marks carved into the bark of nearby trees. Symbols. Lines crossed into circles. Shapes he did not recognize. Some looked old and faded. Others seemed fresh. He touched one carefully, feeling deep grooves cut into the wood. A cold wind moved through the forest. Kofi quickly pulled his hand away. The deeper he traveled, the stranger the forest became. Hidden among thick bushes, he discovered the remains of old campsites blackened by fire. Burned cooking pots lay half buried in dirt. Broken bottles and torn blankets rested beneath dead leaves. Someone had lived here. Not long ago. Kofi's heartbeat quickened. As he continued forward, he noticed something hanging from a low branch nearby. An old necklace made from colored beads. His breath caught instantly. He recognized it. Years ago, Kofi had given that necklace to Amma beside the river during a village festival. He remembered how brightly she smiled when he placed it around her neck. Now it swung silently in the wind like a ghost from the past. Kofi slowly took the necklace into his hand. Amma, he whispered painfully. Memories flooded his mind with every step he took deeper into the forest. Amma laughing while gathering fruit. Amma teasing him beside the river. Amma crying in the village square while everyone turned against her. And him, standing silently while her world collapsed. A heavy shame settled over him again. Suddenly, a whisper drifted through the trees. Kofi froze. He turned quickly, searching the shadows. Nothing. Then came another sound. Soft crying somewhere far ahead. His pulse raced. Amma, he called carefully. No answer. Only silence again. Kofi continued walking, his fear growing stronger with every step. The forest seemed endless now. The trees twisted in strange shapes, and shadows moved between them whenever the wind blew. Then the ground suddenly disappeared beneath him. Kofi cried out as dirt collapsed under his feet. At the last second, he grabbed a thick root and stopped himself from falling completely. Below him sat a deep hunting pit lined with sharp wooden spikes. His entire body shook as loose dirt fell into the hole. If he had taken one more step, he would have died instantly. Breathing hard, Kofi slowly pulled himself back onto solid ground. But something about the pit disturbed him deeply. It was not old. The spikes looked recently sharpened. Someone had maintained it. As Kofi rested against a tree, he noticed footprints nearby. Several sets. Not just one person. Men had been here before. And then another terrible memory returned. Years ago, after Amma ran into the forest, Kofi remembered hearing angry voices later that same night. A group of village men had secretly gathered with torches and weapons. At the time, Kofi believed they only wanted to search for her. But now he remembered something else. One of the men had returned with blood on his shirt. Another had warned everyone never to speak about what happened in the forest. Fear tightened around Kofi's chest. The stories about spirits and curses suddenly felt like lies meant to hide something darker. Maybe the forest never took the missing villagers. Maybe people did. Kofi looked around at the silent trees with new understanding. This place was not haunted by monsters. It was haunted by secrets. Then, from somewhere deeper ahead, he heard it again. A woman crying softly. Much closer this time. Kofi slowly stood, gripping his knife tightly. Despite the fear shaking inside him, he moved toward the sound. Because for the first time in years, he believed Amma might truly be alive. Kofi moved carefully through the forest, following the sound of soft crying drifting between the trees. His breathing had grown heavy from fear and exhaustion. Sweat covered his face despite the cold air beneath the thick branches overhead. Every shadow around him seemed alive. Again, the crying came. Closer now. Kofi tightened his grip on the knife in his hand and stepped over twisted roots and fallen branches. The forest had become darker as clouds covered the sun above. Then, suddenly, a figure rushed out from behind the bushes. Kofi barely had time to react. A sharp stick struck his arm, knocking the knife from his hand. He stumbled backward onto the ground as the figure attacked again wildly like a frightened animal. "Stay away from me," a woman's voice screamed. Kofi raised his arms to protect himself. "Wait," he shouted. "I'm not here to hurt you." The woman stopped for only a second, breathing hard. Kofi slowly looked up. At first, He could hardly recognize her. She was painfully thin. Her clothes were torn and dirty. Long scars covered her arms, and her face looked tired from years of fear and loneliness. Her hair hung wildly around her shoulders, and her eyes were filled with terror. But even after all those years, Kofi knew her. "Emma," he whispered in shock. The woman froze completely. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The forest became silent around them. Kofi's eyes filled with emotion as he stared at the person he believed had been dead for years. Emma slowly stepped backward, still gripping the sharpened stick tightly. "You should not have come here," she said coldly. Her voice sounded rough, as if she had spent years speaking to no one. Kofi slowly stood, unable to stop shaking. "You're alive," he said softly. "All this time, you were alive." Emma gave a bitter laugh with no happiness in it. "Does that disappoint the village?" The pain in her words hit Kofi like a knife. He looked at the scars on her arms, the wounds on her feet, the deep fear still living in her eyes. Suddenly, all the years of guilt inside him became unbearable. "What happened to you?" he asked quietly. Emma stared at him silently for a moment before turning away. "I survived," she answered. "That is all." Kofi followed her carefully through the trees until they reached a hidden shelter built beneath thick branches and large stones. Old blankets covered the ground. Small cooking fires sat hidden beneath rocks to keep smoke from rising too high. Kofi looked around in disbelief. She had truly lived here alone. 4 years. Emma sat near the weak fire, but she never fully relaxed. Her eyes constantly searched the forest around them as if danger could appear at any moment. Finally, she spoke again. The village told stories about curses because the truth was uglier. Kofi listened quietly. Emma's face hardened with old pain. "Before the drought began, I discovered something I was never supposed to see," she said. Years earlier, several powerful village leaders had secretly stolen food and supplies meant for struggling families. While children starved, those men hid sacks of grain and traded them with nearby villagers for money and cattle. Emma had accidentally overheard their plans one night near the storage huts. "They feared I would expose them," she continued. "So they made the village fear me first." Kofi felt sick as he listened. The accusations against Emma had never been about spirits or curses. They were lies. Cruel lies used to protect powerful people. Tears filled Kofi's eyes as Emma continued speaking. "The night I ran into the forest, they followed me." Fear crossed her face even now as she remembered it. Men carrying torches chased her through the trees while angry villagers screamed behind them. During the chase, panic spread in the darkness. One man fell into a ravine. Another was accidentally struck during the confusion. Several people died that night. And instead of admitting the truth, the village created stories about cursed spirits in the forest. "It was easier for them," Emma whispered bitterly. "People fear spirits more than human cruelty." Kofi lowered his head in shame. Everything the village believed had been built on fear and lies. Emma looked toward the trees silently. "I tried leaving the forest many times," she admitted softly. "But those men kept searching for me. Even years later, hunters sometimes entered these woods looking for me." Kofi suddenly remembered the screams from the night before. "That was you?" he asked. Emma nodded slowly. "Some hunters found my shelter 2 nights ago. I scared them away by screaming in the darkness. I wanted them to believe the spirits were real." For the first time, Kofi understood the terrible loneliness she had endured. Years hiding, years running, years surviving like a ghost while the village forgot her. Pain filled his chest so deeply he could barely breathe. "I'm sorry," he whispered brokenly. "I should have defended you. I should have gone after you that night." Emma's eyes finally met his again. And what Kofi saw there hurt more than anger. It was disappointment. "You stayed silent," she said quietly. "When they destroyed my life, you said nothing." Kofi had no defense. Because she was right. The forest fell silent around them again as the weight of the past stood between them like a wall neither of them knew how to cross. For a long time, neither Kofi nor Emma spoke. The small fire between them crackled softly while the forest remained cold and silent around them. Emma sat with her arms wrapped tightly around herself, as if years of fear still held her prisoner. Kofi looked at her carefully. Every scar on her body told a story of pain the village had never cared to hear. Finally, he spoke quietly. "You cannot stay here forever." Emma gave a tired laugh. This forest is the only place that never lied to me. Kofi lowered his eyes in shame. They need to know the truth, he said. The village must hear what really happened. Emma's face hardened immediately. And what will change? She asked bitterly. Will my mother return? Will those lost years come back to me? Kofi had no answer. But deep inside, he knew silence had already destroyed too many lives. The lies must end, he whispered. Emma stared into the weak fire for a long moment. Fear and anger battled inside her eyes. Returning to the village meant facing the people who had betrayed her. But it also meant finally stepping out of the shadows. Slowly, she stood. Then they will hear everything, she said. By the time Kofi and Emma reached the edge of Ndlovu, the sun was already falling behind the trees. Villagers working near the fields noticed them first. One woman dropped her basket in shock. A child screamed and ran toward the village center. Within minutes, panic spread through Ndlovu again. People rushed from their huts, staring in horror at the woman walking beside Kofi. Some stepped backward in fear. Others looked as if they had seen a ghost. It's Emma. She's alive. No, impossible. The whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Near the center of the village, the elders gathered beneath the old baobab tree. Chief Jabri stood frozen as Emma slowly approached. For the first time in years, silence covered the entire village. Emma looked at the faces around her. Some were older now. Some looked ashamed. Others still looked afraid. But none of them looked ready for the truth. Chief Jabri finally spoke with a trembling voice. You should not have returned. Emma's eyes filled with pain. This was my home too, she answered quietly. The crowd shifted nervously. Kofi stepped beside her. She survived because the stories we believed were lies, he announced loudly. Murmurs exploded through the villages. Several elders exchanged frightened glances. Emma slowly faced the crowd. They called me cursed, she said. But the real curse was greed. The village became completely silent again. Emma revealed everything. She spoke about the stolen food hidden during the drought while family starved. She explained how certain leaders spread rumors to protect themselves after she discovered the truth. As she spoke, fear spread across the faces of several powerful elders. One man suddenly shouted angrily, "She lies." But another voice rose from the crowd. No, an elderly villager whispered weakly. She speaks the truth. Everyone turned toward him. It was Bakari, one of the oldest men in Ndlovu. His hand shook as tears filled his eyes. We were afraid, he confessed painfully. The drought made people desperate. We listened to lies because we needed someone to blame. The crowd stared at him in shock. Bakari lowered his head. Fear turned us cruel, he continued. And innocent people suffered because of it. A heavy silence followed his words. Then the truth became even darker. Emma revealed how several men chased her into the forest the night she fled. During the panic, villagers were injured and killed accidentally in the darkness. The so-called cursed disappearances had never been caused by spirits. They were caused by human fear. Gasps spread through the crowd. One woman collapsed crying after learning her missing brother had died during that terrible chase years ago. Another man fell to his knees, realizing his father had been blamed on spirits instead of the chaos created by the villagers themselves. Pain rippled through Ndlovu like a storm. Anger soon followed. Several younger men turned furiously toward the former leaders. You lied to us. You let innocent people suffer. We feared the forest for years because of you. The crowd pushed forward angrily. Some villagers grabbed sticks and farming tools. Others shouted for punishment. For a moment, it seemed violence would explode in the village square. Chief Jabri stepped backward in fear as angry voices surrounded him. Then suddenly, stop! Kofi's voice cut through the chaos. Everyone turned toward him. Kofi stepped forward slowly, his face filled with shame. I was also guilty, he admitted. The crowd fell silent again. I knew Emma was innocent, he continued painfully. But I stayed silent because I was afraid the village would turn against me too. Emma looked at him quietly. Kofi's voice shook with emotion. My silence helped destroy her life. Tears filled his eyes as he faced Emma directly. I cannot erase what happened, he said brokenly. But I will carry that shame for the rest of my life. The honesty in his voice weakened the anger spreading through the crowd. Slowly, villagers lowered their weapons. Many people began crying openly now. Years of lies, fear, and guilt were finally breaking apart in front of everyone. Amma stood silently in the center of the village, overwhelmed by memories she had tried to bury for so long. Every face around her reminded her of betrayal, loneliness, and pain. Yet for the first time in years, the truth was no longer hiding in the forest. Now the village faced a choice. They could continue protecting old lies, or they could finally begin facing the pain they had created together. Night fell over Ndlovu with an uneasy silence. After the truth was revealed in the village square, people returned to their homes in confusion and sorrow. Some cried. Some argued. Others sat in silence, unable to accept what they had learned. No one slept peacefully. Then, just before midnight, it happened. A small fire broke out near the edge of the forest. At first, it seemed like nothing serious. A few sparks. A burning patch of dry grass. But within minutes, strong winds began to rise, pushing the flames higher and higher. The fire grew fast. Too fast. Soon, glowing orange light spread across the dark land, reaching toward the village like a living beast. Fire! Someone screamed. Panic exploded instantly. People rushed out of their huts, carrying children in their arms. Animals ran wildly through the streets. Smoke filled the air, making it hard to breathe. The wind grew stronger, pushing flames toward the village homes. Fear returned once again, but this time, there was no time to argue or think. Only survival. Kofi ran through the chaos, covering his mouth as smoke burned his lungs. He looked around desperately for Amma. Then he saw her. She was already moving through the crowd, guiding people away from burning huts. Even after everything, she did not hesitate. Amma! Kofi called. She turned quickly. Help me! She shouted over the roar of the fire. The children are still inside the storage huts. Without thinking, Kofi followed her. Together, they ran into the thick smoke. Inside one of the burning huts, frightened children were trapped, crying loudly as flames crept closer. The heat was unbearable. Kofi broke the wooden door while Amma pulled the children out one by one. Her hands were burned, but she did not stop. Run, she told them urgently. Go to the river. The children escaped safely, but the fire was spreading too quickly now. A collapsing roof fell behind them, blocking their exit. For a moment, Kofi thought they were trapped, but Amma grabbed his arm. This way, she shouted. She led him through a narrow gap between burning huts, using paths she remembered from years of survival in the forest. Even in danger, she knew how to save them. Outside, villagers watched in shock. The same woman they once called cursed was now risking her life to save theirs. A mother fell to her knees, crying, "She is saving our children." Others stood frozen, unable to understand what they were seeing. Meanwhile, deeper in the village, several elders rushed toward their homes, not to save people, but to save hidden sacks of stolen goods they had kept for years. They ignored the screams around them, ignored the fire. Greed blinded them even in the final moments. One by one, those houses collapsed under the flames. By dawn, the fire finally slowed. The wind died down, and silence returned. But Ndlovu was no longer the same. Half the village lay in ruins. Blackened huts stood like empty shadows. Smoke rose gently into the morning sky. People walked slowly through the destruction, searching for loved ones. But among the survivors, something had changed. They were alive. Because of Amma. Kofi stood near the remains of the village square, exhausted and covered in ash. Amma sat nearby, wrapping cloth around her burned hands. She looked at the broken village without emotion at first. Then slowly, her eyes softened. For the first time in years, she was no longer running. Villagers began approaching her slowly. Not with anger, not with fear, but with silence. A woman stepped forward first and bowed her head. Then another, and another. Even those who once believed the lies could no longer deny what they had seen. Amma had saved them, despite everything they had done to her. Kofi stepped beside her quietly. "This is not forgiveness," he said softly. "Not yet." Amma nodded slowly. "But it is a beginning," she replied. As the morning sun rose over the broken village, something new began to form in Ndlovu. Not a perfect peace. Not full healing. but a fragile unity built from truth, pain, and survival. And for the first time in many years, the village did not feel cursed. It felt alive again. Months passed after the great fire that changed Ndlovu forever. The village did not heal quickly. Many homes were gone. Many memories were broken. People had lost loved ones, land, and the life they once knew. But slowly, step by step, they began to rebuild. New huts were built from fresh wood. Fields were cleaned and planted again. Life returned, but it was no longer the same life as before. It was quieter, honest, real. The forest, once feared as a cursed place, no longer carried the same shadow over the village. The stories of spirits began to fade. Instead of fear, people started speaking about truth, about what really happened and why it had happened. One by one, villagers began entering the forest again. Not with fear, but with respect. Farmers gathered wood carefully. Others collected herbs and fruits like in the old days. The forest, once seen as an enemy, slowly became part of their life again. Near the edge of the village, a small memorial was built. It held no gold or decoration, only simple stones with names carved into them, names of those lost to lies, fear, and misunderstanding. People often stood there in silence. Some cried. Some prayed. But no one denied the truth anymore. Kofi changed too. He no longer stayed silent like before. He worked with the villagers to rebuild homes and restore trust. He spoke openly about mistakes, even his own. Many still struggled to forgive him, but they listened. And he never stopped trying. Amma remained distant at first. She stayed mostly near the edge of the village, watching quietly as life slowly returned. Many villagers were unsure how to face her at the beginning. Some still carried shame. Others carried gratitude they did not know how to express. But Amma did not rush them. She had learned patience through pain. Over time, small changes began. A child smiled at her one morning. Then another greeted her quietly. Then, slowly, people started speaking to her again. Not as a curse, but as a survivor. As seasons passed, the children of Ndlovu grew up without the old fear. They no longer believed the forest was filled with angry spirits. Instead, they saw it as land full of life, trees, and quiet beauty. One evening, as the sun set over the rebuilt village, Kofi stood near the river and looked toward the forest. The wind moved gently through the trees. Birds sang freely in the branches. There were no screams, no whispers, only peace. For a long moment, Kofi stood still, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, the lies, the fear, the suffering, and the truth that finally broke through it all. And in that silence, he understood something deeply. The forest was never the enemy. It had never been cursed. The real curse had lived inside the village all along. Fear, silence, and the cruelty of people who chose lies over truth. Kofi closed his eyes as the wind passed softly over him. But this time, it did not feel heavy. It felt like healing. And for the first time in many years, the forest fell completely silent, not because it was dead, but because it was finally free.